Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us again. In this segment, we're going to be having a conversation with Mr. Jakob Dahlberg, CEO and co-founder at Joint Academy. He's joining us on the program to talk about some research that was published in JAMA Network Open just last month, as a matter of fact, concerning some improvements of treating knee osteoarthritis. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Mr. Dahlberg.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
CEO and co-founder at Joint Academy. Give us a little bit of your professional background and talk about your role there at Joint Academy.
Sure, happy to do that. So originally I studied computer science 5-6 years ago, and in the meanwhile I was looking a lot at my father's research in science, which is an orthopedic professor who has dedicated his whole life to the disease osteoarthritis. So basically, like the quick background and context is we took my computer science, my technology skills, and we basically combined that with my father's research and clinical work in the field of osteoarthritis.
Is this an unmet need as far as knee treatment? I understand that knee treatment in osteoarthritis is extremely common.
Yes. I think what's very interesting from our research and clinical perspective is that it's a big asymmetry in terms of what the science says you should do when you should treat osteoarthritis and what's happening at the clinical level. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that you do way too much surgery, you prescribe medications, you have somewhat of an opioid crisis in the U.S., and you're seeing that spanning globally as well. So it's still not only that it's an unmet need, but often when it is treated, it's not treated in the accurate way. So if you look at what the science says and what most clinical papers are gravitating towards, it should be much more conservative care. It should be physical therapy. It should be behavioral and lifestyle changes, patient education, and stuff like that.
So moving away from the traditional forms of treatment to a digital or streamlined approach to more accurately, not necessarily diagnose, but to more better treat that diagnosis.
Exactly. So what we did is that my father founded a face-to-face intervention. It's quite similar as the diabetes prevention program, but rather for chronic hip and knee pain, osteoarthritis. So you went in and you saw your physical therapist for 3 months. It was an intervention that was founded in Sweden, so I'm originally from Sweden. And the underlying premise is that you should do physical therapy and educate the patient. You should be supervised by a physical therapist, etc. And this intervention became quite successful and famous in Sweden. So what happened with my computer science background is that I asked my father if we could actually digitize it, because the idea and the conceptual idea was that you could actually take something that works very well, in this case accurately at the clinical level, and then digitize it, as you mentioned, to make it even more streamlined, even more efficient, because when you deliver it through a digital mean, for natural reasons, it will be more cost efficient and it will be more accessible and a few other advantages.
Cost efficiency, success, efficiency. What about the pain of any procedure that has to do with osteoarthritis in the knee?
Yeah. So usually when you measure pain when it comes to chronic hip and knee pain and certain other diseases as well, is that you use a numerated rating scale on NRS, which is basically you're asking the patient from 1 to 10 to put in how much pain they've been experienced the last week due to their symptoms. Mm-hmm. So what we did in the study that you mentioned initially during the call is that we compared patients being in Joint Academy, and then we compared them to traditional care such as face-to-face physical therapy, etc. And in our case, we saw that patients reduced their pain by 41% versus the control group that only reduced their pain by 6% after 6 weeks.
Wow.
So we were a few orders of magnitudes better than the traditional care. So that makes things very exciting. And then on top of that, we have some other very compelling health economical studies as well that show that our cost of care is actually 75% less than traditional care. So not only are we, producing much better clinical outcomes for our patients, we're doing it at a fraction of the cost.
Now, obviously, you've had some feedback from patients who had experienced some of the traditional treatments. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. So I think some of the common denominators is that you have a much better, the continuous feedback from your physical therapist through virtual means, text messaging, video calling, all those things makes it much more accessible. So we see common, feedback from the patients is the accessibility. You don't have to drive to your physical therapy clinic. You could just do it through the mobile application. It's much easier to personalize the treatment program because we have so much data, so we could really understand how it should adapt and cater to the patient's needs. So there's tons of very positive feedback from the patients in terms of why they think that a digital treatment is actually better than doing it face-to-face.
And the COVID-19 pandemic, it is a huge benefit getting away from that face-to-face treatment, yeah?
Correct. So we've treated somewhat 40,000 patients now. So it's been a very important part during the pandemic in terms of the average age of our patients is around 65-year-old. And they should not be exposed to the risk of the virus and be living at the clinics at this point in time. So being able to deliver this intervention online has been a huge beneficial factor to just offloading traditional healthcare, reducing the risk exposure to our patients. And we've also created a ton of work for our physical therapists as well, since they work part-time on our service as subcontractors. So there's been a lot of wins for our solution during the pandemic.
You mentioned more cost-effective. How accessible is this digital treatment for the average person, as you say, 65 or older?
So it depends a little bit on which market we're operating in. In Sweden, it's a single-payer country, and we have our contract with the public health system, so it's very accessible. It's free for all. It would almost be an equivalent as Medicare for all in the U.S. In the U.S., we're going state by state, where we have some different deals with some different health plans and health insurances. So in the case that we are an in-network provider with the insurance that the patient holds, they could either go it without any cost, or it's a small copay. So it's a little bit dependent. But right now we're mainly focusing on California, where we have quite a high coverage in terms of being in network with most of the big health plans in California. So I would say it's fairly accessible. And if we're not in network, you could still do an out-of-pocket cash pay as well to access the service.
Where can listeners get more information about Joint Academy and about this research that we've been talking about that found these clinically important improvements of treating knee osteoarthritis? Yeah,
so we're always happy to answer whatever question comes in through our support at jointacademy.com. We also have a very robust and extensive science and research page there where we link to all our clinical studies. I think at this point in time, we're at the ballpark of 12 published clinical studies. And then you can always interact with us at Twitter or LinkedIn or whatsoever.
Jakob, thank you so much for joining us here on Health Professional Radio. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to be here.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Mr. Jakob Dahlberg, CEO and co-founder at Joint Academy. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download it, SoundCloud, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com, Health Professional Radio.